You need to be sympathetic, empathetic, and able to switch off at the end of the day.
Is there a specific scene that you have cleaned that stands out for you in terms of the emotional effect it might have had on you?
In terms of scenes that have stood out for me the most, definitely when it comes to children, they stick with you. I mean, any scene really, I store in my memory bank. I never forget a scene. I can recall any scene, details of that scene. Unfortunately, it is a part of trauma where your brain, even though you're not related to the scene, it's still a traumatic experience, and your brain will log those experiences and memories. A smell, a song, an item brings back those traumatic memories for everybody, and that's why it's important for families not to clean scenes up. But yeah, the one that sticks out the most in terms of sadness and trauma for me was a father that killed his 9-year-old son and then shot himself. I had to take a 3-month hiatus from scenes because of that. Having 2 small children myself, anytime a child is harmed or murdered is very traumatic for me, especially by a parent, as it's not a natural thing. People die, people commit suicide, people get murdered, but a parent killing a child, to me, is the most evil of evil. And those are the ones, yeah. It's unnatural. It's so unnatural that your brain can't even fathom the heartache that is involved in that. So yeah, definitely that one.
Have you ever experienced interesting things at certain scenes? Scenes that stand out for you for other reasons?
Normally those scenes where accidental deaths when they die during weird and wonderful sex experiments, which we try and cover up as best we can, especially if it's a public figure or families on their way. We're all adults, we're all entitled to our own weird and wonderful experiences, but doesn't mean the rest of your family or your neighbors need to know. So we are very discreet like that. We will get rid of anything that looks a little bit untoward or that would harm the integrity of the person that's deceased.
Have you ever experienced difficult clients?
I had a complaint once that the area of the driveway I'd cleaned of blood was now cleaner than the rest of the driveway. So could I come back and please clean the rest of the driveway to match the clean area? I thought that was just really ridiculous.
That happens.
People sometimes have no sense about them. Common sense is not as common as you think it is.
How do people react to grief?
Trauma is a phenomenal experience, and for different people. Essentially what normally happens, I get there and the person that's phoned me is very to the point, direct, holding it together. This needs to be done. This is the scenario. And once we pack up and are ready to leave, they look at me and burst into tears. Otherwise, Yeah, first question I get asked in some instances is, can you find the will? I'm not here to look for the will, I'm here to clean, but it shocks me how money driven a lot of people are. And I judge you, I do judge you. I don't judge you whether you're crying or brying, I judge you if your first concern is monetary value.
Absolutely.
That's when I judge you. But yeah, we experience all sorts of trauma reactions. I, for example, under trauma start laughing. It's just a trauma reaction and we're all different. So if you feel bad for not crying immediately, it doesn't mean you're cold-hearted. The shock is just wearing off in a different stage to everybody else. But yeah, you get the criers, you get the ones that laugh, then you get the ones that are just trying to get a job done so that they can relax and now let go finally.
What was your first ever scene like?
Oh, my first scene was the worst. I'd been qualified for, I think, about a week. And I had, I come from a background of crime scene investigating, forensics, policing. And you think your first scene is going to be this multiple homicide and you're all prepared and you get that phone call. And it was a truck of porta potties from a construction site that had overturned on the highway. And they needed the porta potties cleaned. And it was the hottest day that we'd experienced in South Africa for 5 years. It was about 42 degrees out, in full hazmat, in a porta potty, scraping sewage and thick sewage from ceilings and walls. I think I'll remember that scene, not just because it was my first one, just because how uncomfortable and awful it really was.
Sure, that's it.
Any supernatural or spooky things ever happened to you?
My first experience with supernatural, I would say, was a scene where it was quite a high-profile client, and it was a questionable scene in terms of it was sexual in nature that turned into clearly a homicide and a robbery. And we had to get rid of the paraphernalia before the press and the family arrived on scene. The call was made by his personal bodyguards. And in the process of cleaning, my phone rang, and it was his ex-wife. And I remember her absolutely going mad at me, saying, "You don't touch anything. I want his children to see who he was for real. I want them to know the truth." And I said, "Ma'am, I'm here to do a job, and your children need to remember their father for the father he was, not for what he did in his own extra time." And all the lights had started flickering as she started talking to me. And it's almost as if someone was saying, "Thank you, you're doing the right thing." Closed up scene, off we went. 1:30 in the morning, my dog started growling, which woke me up. I was home alone, the dog had started growling, woke me up. And as I opened my eyes, there was a figure next to my bed. And in shock, I sort of froze, and that figure I heard a voice go, no, please, I just wanted to say thank you. And then gone. We had been on scene, it took us 3 days to clean a man that had hanged himself. It's quite a gruesome scene. I remember there were maggots and beetles up the wall. He'd been there for essentially 4 to 6 weeks without anyone realizing. And he'd hanged himself on the back of his bedroom door. So with the broken neck, he'd left an imprint on the door of his neck sideways. And I'll never forget that imprint because it stuck out so clearly as to how he died. Anyway, I got home, babysitter knocked off. I told my kids to go and bath. I went to go and undress, and I heard them screaming. But the kind of scream that any mother knows is something is wrong. And I ran to them in the bathroom, and they'd both climbed into the shower and closed the door and were holding each other screaming. And finally, when I could get 2 words out of them, they said, "Mommy, we were running the bath, and when we looked, there was a man at the door dressed in black with his neck bent like this, looking at us." There's no way any child would have known what we'd experienced that day. And to have some things follow you home sometimes is a bit unnerving. But you also learn to switch it off. If you give it airtime, if you give it energy, it will feed off the energy.
Absolutely.
Say your piece, do what you need to do, and go.
Do you have a theory as to why something might follow you into your house?
Scientifically, it would all relate back to everything is energy. Energy cannot be destroyed. We cannot destroy it. It is transferred. We are such energetic beings, whether it's our brain waves, our nervous system. We are energetic beings. When you die, wherever that transfer needs to take place, sometimes doesn't happen. But energy also finds energy. And sometimes, like on that, we were the first people to really spend time on a scene. And we find that certain things can latch onto you and follow you home for whatever reasons. And yeah, I think there is some scientific basis in it. I'm not a religious person, but I will, from what I've experienced, I will still try and find a reason for what has happened.
I've heard people who are in the business warn that a crime scene cleaner should never allow their crime scene shoes to enter their homes. What's your opinion on that?
Obviously, shoes contact everything. You take your gloves off, you take your suit off. Your shoes have walked up and down an entire scene. So you're tracking through a lot of trauma, a lot of energy. I don't wear my shoes inside purely because it's dirty. Those shoes, whatever I've just walked in, it's not coming into my house. I've got animals, I've got children. It just makes cleanliness sense. Whether shoes or items bring anything in the house, I can't say for sure. For me, I have purchased artworks from a scene from the family. I've said to, I really like this. Can I pay you for it? And I've purchased items from deceased people and have it in my house, and I've never had an issue from any of those scenes. So whether it's your shoes, I think maybe they attract themselves to a strong energy. You'll find your stronger personality team will always attract, as opposed to the meeker and mild people.
Have you ever felt any type of emotion on a scene?
When you die angry, it's the first thing I can feel. Sadness, regret are very personable. We are sad in different ways. We regret in different ways. But anger is so raw that there have been times where I've walked in and it felt like a brick wall. And this was an angry person in death and in life. And if you ask the neighbors, always didn't like that neighbor. He or she was a terrible person, and you can feel it. Anger, and that's why I always, of all the emotions we need to let go of, anger is the number one, because that is what you leave behind, and that to me is the most tangible of all. And I find a lot of hoarding scenes, a lot of anger, depression, very much.
Speaking of hoarding, what type of hoarding scenes have you encountered?
People vary. You'll get those neat traditional hoarders that have certain items that they like to have. Then you get the gross filth hoarders that just are dirty and messy. And I understand it's a form of depression as well as traditional hoarding. I had one scene where the person hoarded used sanitary pads and tampons.
Sure.
And stacked beautifully in a cupboard, neatly. It was just an odd thing. Some guy used to go and do the poop scooping in the garden and collect in a neat pile dog mess.
Sure.
But yeah, magazines and plastic bags, for the life of me.
As a crime scene cleaner who has done this for a couple of years, how would you say this has affected your life or who you are as a person?
I'm a lot more empathetic towards people. Having suffered quite a bit of trauma in my childhood, I found myself quite hard, closed off. And then you start experiencing suicides, why people have committed suicide, their surroundings, their family life, murders, and having to face the family and think to yourself, I understand you, I understand how you feel, and it's really opened myself up a lot more emotionally. People say, oh, it makes you hard. I disagree. This job makes you a lot more empathetic because we're faced with absolute heartbreak nearly every day. And no one wants to deal with a hard shut-off crime scene cleaner. You're in someone's personal space, essentially assisting them with the most traumatic part of their life. So yes, it has changed me as a person, for the better, definitely for the better.
The strangest items that you have had to remove from a scene?
Strangest items, obviously sex toys is always a given. But you don't even bat an eyelid. Porn, sex toys, everyone's entitled to their own thing. But nothing, the odd illegal substance here or there as well. But we normally try and protect the integrity of the person that's deceased, so we don't advertise what we pick up, especially not to the neighbours and family.
Have you ever had strange requests from clients?
My phone number. No, some people are just needing to get a job done and they know you're there to do a certain thing. They might ask if you don't mind maybe sanitizing the bottom of their shoes where they walked. Police often just run into me when they need to go off. Please, can you just sanitize my shoes? No problem. But no strange requests. You do get the odd person who takes a chance and gives a phone call and, oh, there's been a death. You need to come and clean it. Police case number, please. Phone dead. You get people take chances hoping you'll clean a scene before it's even reported to cover up a murder.
But you guys were involved in a movie set.
Oh yes, Veil was goed. That was freezing. We were in the middle of a shipping yard for hours, and the special effects team just wanted to make sure they'd gotten the blood consistency right, and they were very good. I must admit, I was quite impressed. Sometimes you watch movies that look like they've just thrown a bottle of all gold all over the show, but they were very, very good. We stood around in the freezing cold. I don't even know if we made it into the movie, to be honest, but what an experience. And how everyone thinks that making a movie is so glamorous, but it's anything but glamorous. So, no, cold and tired and staring at people mix blood and cornflower around. Very interesting.
Have you ever come across any occult-related scenes?
Disappointingly, no. Like, I always thought, we grow up thinking, but differently, strangely saying, Gauteng, no. I know Mpumalanga is bigger for the cult murders and sacrifices. Gauteng is not that big for it. It's almost like an urban legend. But yeah, I know Mpumalanga is higher on the cult and Satanism than anywhere else in the country, funny enough.
Why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? Because I think somewhere deep, deep down inside of me, it helps me cope with my own past trauma. Every time I go and clean up a scene and comfort a family, there's a bit of my inner child being healed at the same time. So it sounds selfish, but I know that every time I go there, my intentions are 100% pure, and I only bring just love and kindness to the people who need it the most. And I get something from that. And it's a very rewarding and fulfilling job because I get to see an end result. In forensics or crime scene investigation, you don't always find out the outcome. You might not always get the justice. But I know I can take a small aspect of a trauma and put 100% in, and then when I leave at the end of the day, I can see the result and the family can see the result, and that is very rewarding in itself.
What personality traits do anyone looking to have a career as a crime scene cleaner need to have?
Honestly, in terms of personality trait, everyone says a strong stomach, but you can learn to have a strong stomach. No one is born with a strong stomach. You acquire that. And there's certain things that I don't like on scenes. Anything that is slimy or snotty, I pass it on to a team member. Whereas the rest I'm comfortable with. So don't always think a strong stomach is where to start. You need to be sympathetic, empathetic, and able to switch off at the end of the day. But would I recommend it? I find that taking someone who is relatively intact and not experienced much trauma is not a good idea. I think the most successful crime scene cleaners always have that element of prior post-traumatic stress disorder, allowing us to not be affected as badly on a scene. Let's be fair, you can only be so damaged. So yes, it's easier sending damaged goods into a scene than it is someone pure and whole and has their whole life ahead of them, because there will be scenes that will keep you awake for months on end and that you will never forget. Feelings that you will never forget. I remember every single person I've ever held and let cry on my shoulder. I remember every person that has committed suicide and the feeling of complete hopelessness on their behalf as to how they got to that. It is a lot to carry, and I wouldn't recommend it for someone who hasn't had to carry their own burden first. And that is the honest truth, and that's probably not the answer most crime scene cleaners would give you, because it's not a glory job at all.
You've been in the business for a long while now. We've noticed that there are quite a few pop-ups that have recently tried to enter this business. What advice would you give to the general public regarding these pop-ups, and why should the general public use crime scene cleanup?
Because if it was that easy, everyone would be successful. And as fast as they pop up, that's as fast as they disappear. We are called professionals for a reason. The majority of us, come from strong policing backgrounds or medical backgrounds. We did not open a business overnight and decide this is what we were going to do. We were very well prepared for what we would face. Correct techniques, correct chemicals. Correct chemicals is the most important thing. And it's not a one-stop shop of chemicals either. Our inventory consists of a certain chemical for a certain body part or body fluid that does a certain job in a certain amount of time and has to be used in a certain order for our safety and that of a client. The amount of scenes that I've had to go clean after these fly-by-nights because they have not forensically cleaned. Anyone can clean a scene. Is it forensically clean? That me as a forensic investigator, if I had to walk into your scene, would I be able to find DNA? If I can still find blood or traces of body fluids or DNA, that means it's not clean. That means that there is still a risk of infection. So having my background and knowing what goes into forensically cleaning, how anyone on the street just thinks they can do it, apart from the trauma aspect, but from a clean aspect. Is it clean enough that I can stake my professional life on it? I can't guarantee it for fly-by-nights, but I know I can guarantee it for my group of colleagues.
Regarding COVID-19, what is your take on people who started decontaminating areas overnight?
Fogging. The US has released statements that saying fogging does nothing. You cannot release any chemical into the air and expect it to kill a virus or a bacteria. Firstly, friction is needed to break down the lipid membrane of any organism. That's why washing your hands, sanitizing your hands, you have to rub them. You can't just apply a chemical and hope something's going to happen. It is spraying and wiping again and spraying again. You have to break down the organism or the threat. You cannot just fog anything and hope for the best. You're just wasting your money, you're wasting your time, and you're putting people at risk. And I wish people would actually regulate these companies. And that's coming from a scientific basis. Fogging does nothing.
Why should anyone get a professional to clean up a crime scene?
Mentally, it's taxing. I can go through the roof when someone has said to me, oh, my domestic will clean it. That is not fair. It is against the law from multiple reasons, from a trauma aspect. Not sufficient PPE, personal protective equipment. You're exposing yourself and whoever's going to clean to a host of viruses and illnesses. People think HIV. HIV is a drop in the ocean as to what you can really contract from bloodborne pathogens. I've had to have tetanus shots. I'm more worried about tetanus than I am HIV. I've had pieces of glass go through my gloves with blood on. My first thought is not HIV, it's tetanus. And ask anyone that's had a tetanus shot, it's not pleasant. So, all other things aside, mentally, it's not the right thing to do to someone. Physically, you cannot ensure the protection that we can ensure. And from your perspective, healthy and safety perspective, we know how difficult it is to clean a crime scene properly. Not just cleaning around things, but looking. Blood spatter goes everywhere. That person is not trained to spot small signs, not trained to remove carpets to the degree that we do.
If you had your life all over again, would you still get into this business?
If I had my life over again, I would have gone into it sooner. I think seeing the difference I can make in people's lives is very important to me. And I think I would have been a happier person for it, instead of chasing education, which is very important, but I spent so much of my 20s for me, whereas I think I would have been more fulfilled if I'd spent it for someone else.